Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Dancing with Damage. I'm Ian, your resident philosopher.
And I'm Abby, your resident author.
Today, we talk a bit about farming.
How fun!
The fun farm. The funny farm. I think that's an expression that means like if you're not well. But this will be well because if you're following along in your copies of The Social Blueprint, we're going to lightly dab upon chapter 34. Which is a bit about different kinds of industries and sort of jobs and lack thereof that we're going to be promoting and arguing against or for, if that made sense. And then chapter 35, which is a bit about
Farming.
And specifically traditional farming and moving away from the sort of model of industrial factory farming that exists today.
Indeed.
So in chapter 34, Abby, we had already alluded to the idea of getting rid of certain kinds of industries and work. And that was in the chapter, The Paper and the Parcel, and steering young people in through the apprenticeship program away from certain kinds of work that were more
harmful than good.
Or like the paper and the parcel, more wrapping than present for society. You don't want to be part of the wrapping paper of society. You want to be part of the present within. That is what gives the receiver great joy. If you're good at gift giving, which I'm not sure I'm really good at gift giving. What is the most important thing about being a gift giver?
I think it's considering not what you think would make a good gift, but considering what somebody would actually appreciate. Because it's so hard when someone you love gives you something, and then it sort of has some sentimental value to it, and you just have no use or purpose for this thing. So you think, I can't give it away because the person might find out. I feel bad donating it because the person might find out. I don't want to sell it because the person might find out. You know, if they come to your house and they go, "Where's the thing I gave you? It's been a week." Lie and say you broke it. It's a tricky situation. So I find that it's good to try to avoid burdening people with sentimental objects they don't want by allowing them to sort of steer the ship as to what they might actually appreciate.
Yes, the essential part about gift giving is the giving of something that the other person actually needs and will use frequently. And it's true also with jobs and society. We want work that people are doing to be something society actually needs and will use regularly. In chapter 34, there are a few kinds of industries that we would see sort of eliminated completely from communities or societies following the social blueprint. And then also tied into that is the concept of, at this stage, being able to fully switch off of really environmentally damaging emission type products and industries and switching to more clean energy at this stage. Now, Abby, when we talked about this in the book or when we talk about it amongst ourselves, how do we see sort of that transition happening so that at this stage in the acts, society can be totally green friendly?
So it's important that it's established early on, but there are several decades to allow for this to be implemented because there's been internationally, several countries have promoted using their own nation for industry, try to bring as much industry and as many jobs as they can into their own country. Here's the problem with that. Imagine you're making a steel plant that's going to make cars. That's great. People need cars. So imagine for a second, there is no previous building. There's no condemned or abandoned car factory.
I want to go to the condemned factory, please.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that. But there's no abandoned car factory. So you have to find land that will be suitable and zoned for a factory. And then you have to go through the process of buying property, which can take months and sometimes years. And then you have to get environmental assessments and approval from several layers of government and different agencies to make sure you can build a factory there. And then even after you get all those approvals, you have to have an engineer come in and an architect come in to make sure that they can build the plant to your specifications and needs while also meeting certain safety standards and environmental standards and other things. I don't know why you're smiling.
Because I thought it sounds sort of like a setup for a joke, right? Like an engineer and
an
architect walked into an abandoned car factory, right? And that's the setup. And I don't know how it goes. The other thing I was thinking of is if you take over the abandoned factory and then you produce things, they would be abandonment issue. You know what? It was better in my head. You were saying?
Yeah, I was. Thank you. So I'm just saying it would take probably years before the factory was even built because it takes so long to build the factory. But even if you said, hey, there is a factory that was shut down and is no longer used, you still have to get permits to open everything back up. You still have to go in and make sure everything is safe. You probably have to update a bunch of equipment, and that's usually special order. And then you have to find a workforce. You have to create policies and procedures. You have to find the right people with the right skill set, and you have to train them. And you also have to make enough of a product that if people place orders, you're not already really behind. Usually, when a company opens up, they have sort of a back stock that they're pretty sure people place pre orders for, but you have to make stuff. And you have to make this thing before you can get paid. So you have to have some funding available to cover the space between when you make all of this product to pay all your workers and when you're actually paid by the person buying the product. So it takes, I would say, safely 5 to 10 years from start to finish to sort of build industry because there's just so many stages. And even if governments step in and say, oh, we're going to get rid of environmental considerations, well, that's a terrible idea. But even if they did, there's still so much red tape. They can't take all the red tape away. Even if government just said, hey, here's a plot of land, I'm giving it to you, build a factory tomorrow. There are so many steps that it takes so long to do that. And if they don't follow all of the steps, they're going to very quickly have serious problems, either with safety or with injury or with random fires or gas leaks, or a lot of different things can go wrong. So, what I'm saying is, you can't just say industry is now in our country. You have to give people time to decide they want to participate in the industry and to create the buildings and the spaces and then create the jobs. It's a process. So it's important now, if this is a plan we're moving forward with, to plan for that and start putting those steps in motion. So by the time we say, okay, single-use plastics are banned, they're not good for the environment. They don't have staying power because plastic was sort of known for being something that could withstand, but you can't use it. It's not safe. There are microplastics in people's drinks. It's now being tied in some ways to cancer and heart disease and stroke. There's all these studies. We're banning cigarettes for people under a certain age. Going forward, eventually that industry is gone. We have to find replacements so the economy doesn't crash. And so people aren't cutting corners and unsafely trying to start up industry in a sped up time frame that isn't safe, but also isn't feasible. What are we going to do? Just have a few years where there just isn't any access to vehicles, as an example?
So, Abby, have you ever heard of a mongoose killing a cobra?
Yes, we've had this discussion a few times.
Yeah, there was this famous mongoose called Ricky Tikki Tavi, and he just slew these. He's a cobra slayer. These cobras had no chance. They rolled up, all venomous, no issue.
You're fighting? How do we know about this mongoose?
It's just a story.
Oh,
But the point is, it comes from the idea that mongooses in real life kill a cobra. But do you think that a baby mongoose, fresh into the world, would have a chance against a big cobra?
no.
Probably not. And so the same is true of major switches in industry. Let's say you live in a nation that you say, yes, the best thing for this nation would be to switch over to all the energy being solar or geothermal or hydroelectric, really clean forms of sustainable energy. A lot of people do say that in this day and age. They want to see the whole world change to that today, tomorrow, as soon as possible. But as we understand from damage, and if you accept the theory of damage, and I think there's pretty good evidence for it, the thing is, society has to be healed and strengthened, and social damage has to be reduced before that society is ready to do what's right for itself. Because remember, damage is a force that causes the user to sabotage itself. And the same way it is inside of a person, a society also will seek to sabotage itself if it is damaged. And so just like the mongoose, Abby, is important in order to slay the cobra of environmentally damaging industry, for the mongoose to be stronger, get some biceps, sharpen its teeth. I don't think they should sharpen its teeth. Bad for the enamel. But grow some teeth would be good. And then that cobra stands no chance.
To be like Ian, when building a bridge, over time it becomes old, and the pillars supporting the bridge may need to be replaced. You can't just knock out all of the pillars and then build the replacement pillars because the highway will collapse and it'll be really hard to rebuild it. You have to, one at a time, slowly remove one pillar and have the other pillar in place, ready to switch it out in order to safely keep the highway. I hope it will be shut down during this process, but to keep it from fully collapsing. So we have to take out a bad industry, make good changes, but have something to insert into that hole that is being made by the removal of harmful bad practices.
Or again, you could think of a curling rink where the skipper throws the stone and then many moments later, it arrives on its target. And so what we want to say about the environmental, because you haven't heard us talk much about the environment in terms of changing industry and reducing carbon emissions. A very important goal, but we see it like the curler who hopefully at this point in the axe will have switched over to almost fully green energy production, hopefully. But that stone has to be thrown at the beginning of the axe. Not an easy sport, they say. Even though the social blueprint doesn't mention sort of green initiatives really until chapter 34, we're saying that hopefully the process has started, just like Abby described the bridge slowly becoming whole by chapter 34. Because actually a lot of ideas that we're talking about would need their seeds planted early so that the fruit can be harvested at the right time. So bear that in mind. And now other industries we would like to see at this point sort of axed entirely. In the book, we talk a bit about things like cigarettes and
alcohol
and things like that. And, you know, it's hard to imagine this generation giving up on those things or signing on to that sort of petition. Remember, this is quite a few years down the road from now. And the generation that's making that decision wouldn't necessarily be us. It would be those who have passed through the new education system and also under the leadership of someone from the School of Ruling who would be able to make these sort of sacrificial policies. That is one thing about modern democracies is you rarely see a government ask the people to make sacrifices for their own benefit. It's always pandering and spending more and going into more debt and ineffective spending just to placate. But a true leader, in our view, would be one from the School of Ruling that could call upon their people to make sacrifices for their own welfare. And that's actually what doctors, for example, ask of their patients. Hey, Abby?
Yeah, and actually, as a sort of a positive note, I saw in the news today, alcohol sales are the lowest they've ever been because people are moving away from alcohol. And it's interesting. I don't know if it's finances or just young people aren't as social as they once were, so they're not as interested in that kind of activity. That's one explanation that was suggested. But either way, more and more articles keep coming out saying that even any alcohol is bad for you. So it is positive that society is already on a micro scale. You can see evidence of people already sort of having this mindset shift or making these small changes. Humans are ready for this. Humanity wants a change like this. We're just sort of trying to put it in a blueprint and a timeline that we think makes sense to hopefully help us all work together to accomplish these goals.
If you're doing a tug of war against a fearsome opponent, everybody on the team wants to yank the rope together so you can pull those harmful policies into the mud so that they're slathered with it and defeated by us, the tuggers. So, yeah, that's very true, Abby. And it sort of reminds us of that chapter about the rat in the corner. The generation is sort of here that knows that the unmoderated technology and the sort of unlimited access to damaged sort of behavior has really started to negatively impact our quality of life. And they're ready to turn and face the cats that have been pursuing us for quite a few generations. So anyway, that's a bit about chapter 34. You can, of course, find more in the Social Blueprint. I like how you said blueprint, and then you said it was a blueprint, and it says blueprint right on there. That's very nice.
I think that's part of the reason we chose the title. But anyway, I think we're also going to talk about farming, which is very near and dear to my heart. I have many years of experience working on farms in various capacities. So
she was actually grown at a farm. Yeah, she was planted, and there was an Abbey shrub, and I was able to go and harvest it. No,
you harvested the whole shrub?
That's
not even how shrubs work.
Yeah, and also I don't think any shrubs really produce anything you harvest. So I think shrubs are more decorative.
Yeah, I mean, quick summary. So I grew up in what was a small rural farming community in the Greenbelt. Some fruits and vegetables, and then some grapes because it's sort of in wine country. So a lot of really famous wine brands have their headquarters there, which apparently is exciting, and they do wine tours. I personally do not consume alcohol, but we used to have acres and acres thrown around on as kids And it was really beautiful because you'd go and you'd help out with your friends' farms, and that was sort of like free babysitting. You'd just go and work on other people's properties. And you got to have really great experiences because there were campfires and there was often people had swimming pools. So you got rewarded for a hard day's work, but it taught you some discipline like the military, and also an appreciation and respect for nature and the value of good food and how hard it is to make good food. And I think part of the reason we wrote chapter 35 was in this spirit of there's a lot of benefit to smaller rural communities. And there's also a wave of people, unfortunately, because a lot of people don't want to do farming work anymore. It's hard work, it pays well, but it's hard work. And there's so few people willing to help because it does take a village that a lot of farms are selling off to industry, and they're plowing over what limited fertile ground we have in Canada to feed the whole country and just building houses on it. And I will tell you, it is so much harder to take dirt that is not meant for growing to grow lots of beautiful, bountiful, plentiful, nutrient rich food than it is just to use the soil that's already there. So we're hoping to sort of shift away from this overwhelming avalanche of what farmland we have left, which is already not enough to feed our country, being turned into buildings and houses and factories, and revert more to, okay, we need this. This is a valuable resource. Hey, Ian.
Big time.
Big time.
Big time. I liked, the dirt gave me what's that expression? Give me the dirt on someone.
To get the dirt on someone?
Yeah, we got the dirt on that subject from Abby.
I guess we're 1920s investigators in a movie now.
See, we're gonna get the dirt on this stuff.
Or maybe it's news people. This, I gotta get the dirt on this story. Get the scoop, see?
Yeah, maybe. I have a story about a karate master and this karate guy. And he's got this 2x4. 2x4s are about 8 feet long. And he put it on 2 stands so that it was laid out across the 2 stands. And he gathered a crowd around him and said, "Behold," he talked like that. He said, "Behold, I shall use my karate hand. I shall striketh the 2x4. And
what about his other hand?
That was gesturing dramatically so as to enhance his performance. He said, "I will use my karate hand to strike the 2x4, and it shall break in twain in 2 pieces." And everyone said, "Oh!" And then he did it. Wacha! And then the 2x4 snapped in half. 2 pieces. And they lay on the floor. And then a small infant, yes, an infant, came out of the crowd and said, but can you break it, one of the halves?"
An infant was speaking in full sentences and using words like halves.
And gesturing.
You met an infant?
Well.
How about a young child?
Well, it was a young infant. No, that's even worse. So anyway, this person comes out of the crowd and challenges the karate master. So the karate master says, "Fine, I broke a long board. I'm sure I can break a short one. Should be even easier, maybe." Puts the board up to move the stands in because now the board is shorter, and tries to strike it, to break it. Ayah! But his hand bounces away. Ouch. His hand is broken now. And the moral of the story is it's easier to break something, a bigger thing, than it is to break a small thing of the same material. That's just sort of true. If you've gone through life, you'll have noticed that. And why am I telling you this story is because back before the Industrial Revolution, most people lived in agrarian lifestyles, rural communities, and that's because so many people needed to be farming in order to support the food supply. Then the Industrial Revolution happened, and gradually, because of farming technology, people were able to move away from rural living and farming, and a smaller percentage of the population had to farm. And that led to the massive urbanization we see today. But there's a few things wrong with that, Abby. Hey, why do we argue that it's negative to have industrial farming and more people in cities?
Well, it's in one way large corporations owning most of the food. They can make prices very high. They can exploit their workers. They're the only people hiring. So that's part of the issue we see. And they also use practices generally, especially with animals, a lot of practices involving animals that are made to be eaten or made to produce things like milk or eggs are not treated at a standard which you would appreciate. I actually remember We went around in Niagara and we talked to a lot of farmers. We had the opportunity. And I found out all of the different ways they label chicken eggs mean different things. So free range doesn't mean free range. It means I think they had 3 feet of space they were allowed to walk around in, and that counted as free range. There were all these different, like, happy chickens, backyard chickens, all these different things meant something different. But most of these taglines that companies are allowed to use basically mean that the chickens are from somewhere between chained down and not able to move at all to having very close crowded quarters where they can move just a little bit to maybe having a little bit of outside time of day, but not too much. And that's part of the reason with our chickens, we made sure they had lots and lots of space, about 50 times what was recommended for them, because we felt what was recommended was not what was ethical.
Very true. So good point. So factory farming is harmful to the animal's welfare, so it is ethically unsustainable.
Mhm.
And then when we talk about industrial farming on large scale, you've seen these massive combines probably on the news, and big pesticides and wasteful irrigation and water. And basically, large scale farming is not sustainable for the environment.
Yeah.
So for those reasons, it's a negative thing anyway. But in the other piece of it too, again, it supports urbanization and takes away valuable jobs that could be filled by people looking for valuable work. So what we advocate for, oh, and one other thing, not just that, but large farms. Remember the karate master in the board? I mentioned him, did I?
I feel like we enjoyed that. Hoo-yah!
Yeah, the whole point of that, and I totally forgot, got off track, but the whole point of it is large industrial farming, as climate change gets worse and as pathogens and fungal species and parasites and all these things get worse, are much more susceptible to being broken by those phenomenon, droughts, flooding, all those things, than smaller traditional farming. It's just the nature of large scale operations versus small resilient operations.
Can I make an example?
Oh, yes.
It's a really random one. So if you look at dog breeds, there are dogs that are affectionately named mutts, where they have lots of different dogs in their genealogy. And generally speaking, they have less health problems. They tend to live a little longer, and they overall are easier to care for because their bodies, there's lots of different genes, lots of different stuff. It's part of the reason as humans, we don't allow each other to marry our cousins, because inbreeding, joking aside, is very harmful because there's no diversification of genetics. So the chances of the recessive gene or the negative gene or the gene that you hope evolution will snuff out will be put back into the prominent gene pool. So when it comes to things like fruits and vegetables, I know it might sound like, but they're fruits and vegetables. But if every farmer sources their own carrots, their own broccoli, their own Brussels sprouts, they'll attract different butterflies, different pollinators, different bees. And it actually creates slightly different strands of the same vegetable. That's why sometimes you get an apple, Honeycrisp is an example, Honeycrisp apple. You can sometimes get one and it's beautiful and sweet and you're like, oh, it's so crisp. And then sometimes you get one, it's a little sour. That's because there's slight variations, just like in humans. We're all human, we're made of the same parts. If you look inside of us, we got the same stuff, but there's differences between us. So if the same people are making all of our food, all of a sudden there's no resilience. There's no chance that genetically this parasite we might be resistant to. So if they have a crop of carrots and it's all the carrots for the whole country and they're all made by the same people and there's no diversification in the seeds or how they plant them or what nutrients they use, and there's some kind of an infection that they're susceptible to, all of a sudden we're out of carrots. Carrots are extinct. Bye-bye carrots. I hope you enjoy making the bunnies cry.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Don't make the bunnies cry. And, I think it was Einstein that said, once the bees all die out, humanity is going to follow a few years after, right? That's like a famous quote. So again, these large scale operations are a part of what kills these sort of normal ecological cycles. So traditional farming will reinstate those. Bees are having no problem until the big sprayers and everything came along. So for all those reasons, what we argue in this chapter 35, I really like it. And growing roots, you can see on this, I had to check, I'd forgotten what it was. But the idea is that at this point in the acts, that the apprenticeship program, remember, that's the kind of funnel Or who are those people who stand air traffic controllers? You know, the apprenticeship program is sort of like the air traffic controller of the job market, helping to guide the planes to the right runways. Would sort of have a massive push for young people, especially, to go into farming and redirecting them into rural communities. And many positive benefits we've already talked about, but for example, rebuilding sort of the rural populations. Well, in Canada, and I think around the world, a lot of rural towns are sort of dwindling and dying.
Yeah.
But this sort of action would be like a steroid to just get them to grow again with new life and new people and new families. And also the incentivization through the apprenticeship program would be for those young people to be doing and practicing traditional farming in those areas. And that would just have such a massive benefit for the people doing it, and for society, and for the ecosystem, and for animals, and for everybody like that. And for one other group, Abby, in the book we argue about ecological refugees.
Yes. So in short, climate change is not super great. And I might at one point, I actually took a course on how to explain climate change very fulsomely. So maybe one day I will. I won't do it now because it'll take 20 minutes. But it's important to understand that we're already spiraling, and it's possible to sort of halt it or curb how bad it will get, but we're never going to get to a point where it's not affecting us. Already, winters are colder, summers are hotter. So there are a lot of countries that are very close to the sea level, and with the ice caps melting, they're going to be flooded. They're not going to be able to live there anymore. And there are a lot of countries, large countries with billions of people as their populations, who are running out of water, who are running out of food. And as humanity, we have to help each other. So we can't just allow for them to stay in a country that they can't survive in. It's not tenable. So we're going to have, we think, in the next 10, 20 years, a shift where many nations, not just small populations, but nations, are going to be displaced internationally so that citizens have a chance to survive and access vital resources like food, water, and shelter. So we have to consider now that Canada, being one of the largest sources of fresh water internationally, with a lot of space that could be habitable, would be an excellent place for some of those ecological refugees to come. And I think the United Nations and NATO and just generally heads of state would agree that we should take on more people because it's the right thing to do. So, like, just the mental health benefits, if you're going through a stressful situation, to be in nature. We live in a rural place. When people stop in, they go, man, it's just, I feel so different. When you leave a city and you go and you stand and you look at water, you stand with the trees, you breathe in that fresh air, it really impacts you to your soul. And working outside and in nature when it's nice and there's no smog and with animals, it doesn't feel as painful as it does to be in an office with harsh fluorescent lighting 5 days a week, however often you work.
So yes, we anticipate, and I'm sure much of the scientific community does as well, that in the next few decades, many, particularly when you look at the map, developing nations will be affected by flooding or droughts, desertification, issues to do with climate. And so we argue in the book that if developed nations, who, if you look at the map, tend to have more arable available land and will be a bit more resilient to climate change, if those nations are accepting ecological refugees, the advantage of re-ruralization or going back to traditional farming is that would be a good place to relocate ecological refugees to. Great benefit for the country receiving the ecological refugees because you need many hands to work traditional farms. It's very wholesome and healthy work and valuable and good work.
Promotes community.
It's very rewarding and important work when you look at the alternatives in supplying food for your community, etc. It's definitely not the wrapping paper. It is the heart of the present. Good gift.
Yeah, and it also transcends a lot of language and cultural barriers. So you wouldn't need too many resources to allow people to feel accepted and loved in a community and to be able to work with people in a community, even if you don't necessarily have the same level of achievement with a common language.
That's true. And it also would be of great benefit to the refugees themselves coming in, the ecological refugees, because if they, currently in Canada, and I'm sure around the world, those coming into a country from outside the borders tend to congregate in the urban areas. And as Abby pointed out, that's not the best quality of life. Far better to have more land and more space and more, intrinsic net value to the society you're moving to by going and doing a useful job in a ruralized community. So for all these reasons, and it's much better explained in the book, that's why we argue for, at this stage, sort of funneling off. And another way you could think about it is sort of rain off a roof, right? You can just let the rain fall off a roof and just let it trickle onto the ground. And that's like the potential of ecological refugees and the potential of the young generation that will be growing up in this time.
It will water the plants and help them grow to be powerful and beautiful and healthy.
Well, that's right. You could just let the rain run off the roof and just absorb into the soil to no effect. Or you could put a downspout and gather up that water and put it into cisterns, and that water can be used to water the garden or drink or be very useful. So
I was thinking you just plant the vegetables where the water fell, but I mean, there's several ways to get to the same place.
That's right. You can delicious roof water vegetables. No, I think Abby's right. So anyway, tell us what you think in the comments. Do you think in a few decades society will be ready and to say, yep, there's going to be sort of a slow but mass exodus away from urban centers back to the rural communities from whence we came? Do you think there's going to be some major problem with that apart from the obvious logistical ones? We're going to talk more about that in the next episode, I think. But I think, Abby, that's probably good for today. So I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode. Tune in with us next time.
Have a great day.